Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to session 93 of the Harborne Islamic Study Circle, the HISC Seerah sessions, where we're continuing with the Battle of Badr. Last week we talked about how the Prophet made dua just before the Battle of Badr, how Allah promised him victory. Abu Bakr gave him a big hug, and Prophet received revelation there and then on the battlefield. And it was quite joyous with the fact that Allah was going to send some angels to support them. And we talked about how the angels descended. There's a cloud of angels, and one of the angels was saying to his animal, Aqdim Hayzum, and how the angels would partake in the fighting, such that when the Muslims started an action, they're starting to kill or they're starting to bring the sword down, the angels would complete that action. The fact that Jibreel Islam wore a yellow turban, the mushriks charged, and the Prophet on that charge picked up a handful of dust and threw it, and a speck of dust went in the eyes of all the Quraish. And we also talked about how there were narrations about how the Prophet physically fought in this battle, and then he would spend some time back in his headquarters. And then we talked briefly about just a couple of minor stories of the battle. One was Ummayah, a young 16, 17-year-old lad who was having some dates, but then when he heard the promise of heaven, paradise being as wide as the heavens and the earth, he cast away his dates and jumped into the melee and was martyred. We talked about how one of the Sahabi was fighting so hard his sword got broken, blunted. Came back to Prophet who gave Ukasha a wooden stick, and he went to fight with that, and as he's fighting he's lifted up this twig and it became a sword. And then finally we talked about how the Prophet gave amnesty to a few people at the beginning of the battle, as he's telling them that the people of Bani Hashim should be protected, and specifically Al-Abbas, his uncle, should not be killed. Likewise, Abu Bakr should not be killed. And then we talked about how Abu Bakr was told that he's not going to be killed by one of the Ansari, but said, look, I'm going to defend my friend if, I'm not going to let him die. And unfortunately, he died despite this personal amnesty. So carrying on with the Battle of Badr, it's very early morning, and again, just recapping, the Muslims 313 there or thereabouts, 82 to 86 Muhajir from Makkah. There's 61 of the Aus and about 170 from the Khazraj. They only had two horses between them. One belonged to Al-Zubair and the other to Al-Miqdad. And Ali was head of one flank, and Sa'ad bin Mu'adh was head of the other flank, and that was the Ansar. You had one of the person at the rear of the army, Qais bin Abi Sa'sa, and obviously the Prophet overall in charge. So again, putting it into context, only 313 plus a few, and they're fighting nearly 1,000 Quraysh, and these are the elite of the Quraysh. They've got over 100 horses. They've got 600 suits of armor between them. They've got hundreds of camels, and they're equipped for war. And we see constantly in the life of the Prophet ﷺ why the people are so endeared to him. I mean, he is here on the battlefield. He's making dua. He's up all night. He's inspecting the army. He's encouraging the army. He's giving them a vision. He's telling them of what to expect, how to fight. He knows the individuals by name, and he appoints the right people to be in charge of the different flanks. And he gives Musab ibn Umair the flag of war, and that's the rallying point. So again, the people that he's appointed, Sa'd bin Mu'adh, there's Ali bin Abi Talib, Musab bin Umair, all of these people are very young. They're youngsters. They're in their early 20s or late 20s, and they're very dynamic leaders. And the Prophet, he can see these qualities of leadership. Not only does he know how to lead, he knows how to get the best of his people and to appoint as leaders. And although it's fair to say that you can teach aspects of leadership, but you also know there are some people who have that something extra, who are more naturally sort of gifted in terms of being able to lead and to being able to understand how to get the best of people. The Prophet is one of these people, and he's able to do that. And not everyone can be a good leader. And there are people, even everyone will come across people in their life who are good leaders or poor leaders, who lead for the right reasons and lead for the wrong reasons. What we should do is just take the good aspects of leadership from the people we interact with, and certainly study how the Prophet ﷺ was such a great commander and leader, and got people, got the best out of people, even on the battlefield. So we'll come back on to that. When the battle started, and in most of the battles, the Muslims had a chant. The chant that they had in the Battle of Badr was Ahad, Ahad. So again, it's a very simple message. It's a very easy message to rally around, and it's got a really powerful rhythm to it. When you're on the battlefield and you've got the whole army chanting Ahad, Ahad, Ahad. Again, so it can be quite intimidating. And so for all of these reasons, and the Muslims being lined up in ranks, the angels coming down, the Muslims having that steely determination to win, it was quite clear very early on that the Quraysh, they just panicked. Allah had cast terror into their hearts, and they weren't in the fight, and it was a complete capitulation. They were running everywhere. There's hardly any strong resistance, despite the fact that they've outnumbered the Muslims over nearly 3 to 1. We got the fact that the Muslims just completely routed the Quraysh, and it was a very one-sided, decisive battle. And all the things that we talked about leading up to this have prepared them. The rain the night before, the process of getting there the day before the others, camping in front of the well, the sleep and the dream on both sides, lack of sleep on the other side. So all of these things, as well as the anti-war pitches from the Quraysh side to try and stop the battle, all of these things are thrown into the melee and just causing rank confusion amongst all the Quraysh. And although there are pockets of fierce fighting, and we know that because there are a small number of Muslims who were martyred during the battle, they vastly were outnumbered by the casualties and prisoners of war that were taken, that the small group of Muslims took of the Quraysh. So obviously the books of Seerah, they document one particular interaction, one particular battle or killing, more so than any other, and that is obviously what happened to Abu Jahal. And Abu Jahal has been to this point the most vicious enemy of the Prophet ﷺ in terms of being the anti-leader to the Prophet ﷺ. So we talked about the leadership qualities of the Prophet ﷺ. And very early on in Makkah, the Prophet ﷺ even made a dua. It's recorded that he wanted one of the two Umars to be on his side, whichever pleased Allah the most, because the Prophet ﷺ recognized, even though these two people were steeped in Jahiliyyah at the time. They had that leadership quality, and if he could entice through Allah's permission either of these two strong leaders and personalities onto his side, he knew that that would strengthen Islam. And one of these two, it's reported to have been Abu Jahal, and the other is Umar ibn al-Khattab. And obviously we know which one Allah blessed as being the one chosen to support the Prophet ﷺ. But again, you see in how Umar, and we'll come on to one of his stories later on today, inshallah, how he has that leadership quality and the anti-leadership quality that Abu Jahl had. I mean, he was a fierce leader for what he believed in. And although it was Jahiliyyah, although it was evil, he did the most to rally the people around his cause, which was against Prophet ﷺ. And, Prophet ﷺ gave him a title, which we'll do in the end in a second. So Abu Jahl, he's the one who insisted that they go to fight. He's the one who insisted, who got the other leaders who were being cowardly, like Ummayah ibn Khalaf, but he's the one who riled them up enough so that they came and they fought. So he is the kingpin on the Quraishi side, and you get a sense that it's a personal thing with Abu Jahl. Although he's the uncle of Prophet ﷺ from not from Bani Hashim, but there is some personal animosity, and it's this personal thing that is driving his uber zeal against the Muslims, and he wants to see it out through to the end. So it's narrated that even though he's this great leader of the Quraysh, he is actually killed essentially by two youngsters who are in their mid-teens probably, despite all his bluster and all his puffed up opinion of himself. Much like the Prophet ﷺ, Sa'd built a little sort of portico trellis area where the Prophet ﷺ could go back as his headquarters. The same thing happened for the Quraysh. So Abu Jahl had his own headquarters, not on the main battlefield, but just to the side of the battlefield, it's said in some groves, in a more secluded and shaded area. So Abu Jahl, he would be there with surrounded by his elite guard, overseeing what was happening, and he must have sort of been panicking to see the complete rout that the Muslims were inflicting on them. And so as the battle goes on, it's narrated by Abdur-Rehman ibn Auf, and Abdur-Rehman, he was a rich Muhajir in the time of Makkah, gave it up, everything, made the emigration. He's here in Medina now, and he's setting up himself again. And he's, as I say, we've talked about his story before about how he became a successful businessman again through the blessings of Allah. So he's on the battlefield, and he then finds himself flanked by two youngsters, again, probably in their mid-teens, 16, 17, thin, youngsters. And one of them pokes Abdur-Rehman and says, have you seen Abu Jahl before? And he looks, why are you asking? He goes, have you seen Abu Jahl? Do you know which one he is? And then this youngster, he says, look, I've heard that Abu Jahl has discredited, or disrespected rather, the Prophet ﷺ, and I've taken an oath to Allah that if I see him, our shadows will overlap, until one of us is dead. So he's basically saying, look, I'm going to, I want to know who he is, so that basically I can either kill him or die in the process. So Abdur-Rehman, he is sort of a bit taken aback by this young zeal of this youngster. Then he gets prodded on the other side, and another youngster, he leans over and whispers in his ear, "Oh, Abdur-Rehman, do you know who Abu Jahal is?" And he goes, "Well, why do you want to know?" "Because I want to kill him." And obviously these are youngsters from Medina. They've never seen Abu Jahal before. They don't know what what he looks like. So then, Abdur-Rehman, he's sort of he describes it how he gets a bit strengthened by the fact, or resolved by the fact, he's got these two, although they look young and naive and tempestuous, but certainly brave warriors. And their names are Muawwad bin Amr bin Al-Jamuh and Muawwad bin Afrah. And Muawwad, he was one of the two brothers who initially stood up for the Mubaraza, the duel right at the beginning of Badr against Utbah ibn Abiyah. You remember there were the three people who stood up, and they went to do the Mubaraza against Utbah, his brother Shayba, and Walid, the son of Utbah. And then Utbah said, "Look, you youngsters, we've got no quarrel with you. Go back, send us people worthy of us." So Muawwad was one of these three, him and his brother, and both of them were shaheed in the Battle of Badr. And the other chap was Muawwad bin Amr. So Muawwad, he was one. It said he was one of the 72 people who gave the second pledge of Aqaba. And at that time, he was barely old enough to give the pledge. So he'd probably be about 13, 14 at the second pledge of Aqaba. And then you're fast forwarding a couple of years for the Battle of Badr. So he was one of the very early, converts in Medina, and certainly one of those who was blessed enough to give the second pledge of Aqaba. So the story is narrated. It's in the books of Bukhari and Muslim, how Muawwad, as soon as Abdur-Rehman saw Abu Jahl in his sort of headquarters, he turned to his two companions and says, "There's your mighty companion. There's a person that you're both looking for." And then he describes how both of them, basically, they just flew off. The metaphor is that they swooped like falcons. So they sort of darted straight. They left his side, and they sort of darted straight towards Abu Jahl. And because they're youngsters, they probably weren't. They were able to, navigate the battlefield quite sort of unnoticed, because they're not big, scrawly men in armor. They're youngsters just with a sword. So they're both darting to Abu Jahl. And Muawwad, he describes how he got there first, but obviously the guards could see them coming, and so Abu Jahl is protected by Ikramah, his son. So Muawwad says that he's running really fast, and then he doesn't think that he'll be able to strike a direct blow on the chest or the head and neck of Abu Jahl. So he jumps up and swings, and it's like a diving swing with his sword to see if he can go over the protection and deal a blow. So he pounces up, and as he's descending from his sort of jump, he manages to strike Abu Jahl's leg, and he cuts his leg clean off, okay, as he's coming down. And it's narrated, it made a sound, and it's narrated that it's like when they used to grind dates in a millstone, and then sometimes you get a date that gets stuck, and as you're grinding it shoots off. So it's described that his leg shot off the cut bit, as the sword was coming down, as one of these sort of dates flies off the grindstone. So then he lands down. His Abu Jahl's leg is chopped off. Ikramah, his son, is defending his father. Sees that, obviously he's evaded that, and then Ikramah brings his own sword down, and manages to cut the leading arm, the right arm of Muawwad, and basically severs his arm virtually completely off, or his right arm. Okay, and then it's later said that he was walking around the battlefield, and this is the bit that's a bit squeamish. He's walking around the battlefield with his arm trailing, so it's hanging off by a tendon or a little a skin tag, so his arm is just basically dangling off his shoulder. And he's saying whilst he's fighting in the battle, his arm was irritating him because it's just dangling down. It's not doing anything. So then he describes how he then leaned down, stood on his dangly arm, on his fingers, and then jolted up to rip off his arm so it wouldn't bother him in the rest of the fight. And then he fought the rest of the battle with the one arm, and he lived a fairly natural life. He I think he died in the Khilafat of Uthman, so he describes how he his arm was dangling off. Then and then so Abu Jahl, he's had his leg chopped off, and then Muawwad then also gets in a fatal blow. So he strikes him because Ikramah is tending to Muawwad, so Muawwad can go in and strike the fatal blow. So then Abu Jahl in his headquarters has been struck down by these two Ansari youth. All his haughtiness, all his loftiness, all his arrogance, Allah completely takes away with this fairly humiliating end, and we'll talk about how his end was more humiliating even further. So then these two, Mu'adh and Mu'awwad, they rush back to the Prophet ﷺ, again through the battlefield, and they both then arrive at the Prophet ﷺ's headquarters at the same time, and they're both in the young zeal claiming that they killed Abu Jahl. We've killed Abu Jahl. We've killed Abu Jahl. And the Prophet says, have you really? And they're both saying, yes, we have. And probably in their youth, and I've killed him. No, I've killed him. And the Prophet asks to see their swords, and sees the blood on both their swords, and says, verily, you have both killed him. So they both get the blessings of killing Abu Jahl, but he hasn't actually died. These two people, they've inflicted what we would call is the fatal wound. Okay, so Abu Jahl, he's on his deathbed essentially. He's
bleeding out.
He's sort of bleeding out, yeah. And when the battle is done and the rout is complete and absolute, and all the Quraish have died, the Muslims are victorious, the one thing that the Prophet ﷺ says is, find Abu Jahl, find Abu Jahl. He wants to have that that peace in his heart of confirmation that his most bitterest enemy, Abu Jahl, has perished. So he sends out instructions, find out where Abu Jahl is, how he's died. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, who is one of the earliest converts in Islam. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he was a slave. Lots of narrations from him. Very great Sahabi. He was probably in the first 10 people who became Muslims. And again, it said through Abu Bakr. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he's, and probably others, they're scouting the battlefield to see where Abu Jahal is. And then he comes across Abu Jahal, obviously in his abandoned headquarters. But Abu Jahal is still breathing his last. So you will often find, there's a particular type of, heavy, labored breathing of people as they're about to die. And Abu Jahal is in this sort of very labored, heavy breathing that he knows the end is near. He is about to die. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he comes, he finds him, and he sees him still, as I say, virtually about to die. And so again, Allah completes the humiliation of Abu Jahal, and Ibn Mas'ud, he comes over, and then he steps on top of, or on the chest or the neck, on the chest or the neck of Abu Jahl, and puts his foot on his neck, and says, "Do you now?" This is Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, talking down on Abu Jahl. "Do you now admit that Allah has disgraced you?" And then you get a sense of the utter arrogance of Abu Jahal, who says, "How have I been disgraced? I'm not disgraced. I have been killed by my own people. That's not a disgrace for me. The disgrace is on you for killing your own brothers, your own fathers, your own cousins." So even to the end, he is being arrogant. And again, it goes back to this concept of jahiliyyah, this concept of nationalism, of tribalism, of being the best tribe, the best family, the best people, right? And it's this arrogance, that you see displayed here. And he didn't have the humility that Pharaoh had when Pharaoh was chasing Moses, and was, and then you got the water, drowning Pharaoh. At that point in time, when he knows death is about to overcome him, he's about to say the Shahada, about to admit that there is only one Allah. And, Jibreel can sense that, and Jibreel is trying to shove dirt into the mouth of the Pharaoh, of Moses, and Allah does not accept the fact that now that death is upon him, he wants to become a Muslim. Here you have Abu Jahal, who is a step beyond that. He is even too arrogant to admit, that he needs to worship Allah. How have I been disgraced? I've been killed by my own people. The law of the land, the international law, how we live our life, you guys have disgraced yourself by killing me. Despite the fact there's Abu Jahl who insisted on the battle, took the people out, and all of that thing, it's, on the say-so of this one man. So then Abu Jahl, he turns to Ibn Mas'ud and says, "So, what is the result of the battle?" Again, whether he was delirious or whether he is just, taking the Mickey to that step further, saying, "What is the outcome of the battle?" He's asking Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud says, "Allah and His Messenger have won with great pride," and then Abu Jahl, he looks at the Abdullah ibn Mas'ud's foot on his neck and chest, and again he says, "You have stepped on a high place, O son of a shepherd." So again, you get a sense of his utter arrogance. You know, who do you think you are? You're just a mere shepherd, a son of a shepherd. You know, how dare you step on a nobleman is the sentiment. You know, and so this arrogance. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he obviously gets, you know, quite riled up by this, sees, you know, tries to cut Abu Jahl's head off, notices his sword just isn't quite too blunt for it, notices Abu Jahl's sword still in his own hand, you know, unused, and so he kicks his sword out of his hand, takes Abu Jahl's own sword and severs Abu Jahl's head, and then takes the head and rushes back to the Prophet ﷺ. And as he's rushing back, he describes the feeling. It's as if he is floating on air, running on air. Okay, and obviously, I mean, these guys, they've grown up with the tyranny of the Quraysh and the ultimate tyranny of Abu Jahl. And these are people who were untouchable up until a few hours ago. And now, you know, completing this route, you know, he's heading back to the Prophet ﷺ. So then he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, I found the corpse of Abu Jahl. And the Prophet says, have you really? Have you really? Have you really? 3 times. And, you know, and some narrations say, you know, he cast the head of Abu Jahl there. And this is when the Prophet ﷺ went on to say the famous phrase that every nation, every group or community has its Pharaoh. You know, somebody who's really oppressive and evil and arrogant and obstructive. And he goes, Abu Jahl was the Pharaoh of his people, of his Ummah. And so this is the point where Prophet describes Abu Jahl, you know, once the battle's done, as the Pharaoh of his people. So obviously, you know, the chroniclers of the Seerah, they've, you know, made sure that, you know, this is recorded in all its gory details. So although Abdullah ibn Mas'ud dealt the sort of the final blow, he's not credited with delivering the fatal, wounds, right? Because Abu Jahl was going to die. He was about to expire, but Allah had kept him alive just enough to be further humiliated by Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And the two Muawwad and Muawwad, they're the ones who were credited with actually the ones who have killed him. And it was Muawwad who got the armor, the booty of Abu Jahl, because Muawwad, he sadly, or not sadly, depending on your perspective, he became shaheed during the battle, and so he couldn't collect. You know, both of them would have the equal share of Abu Jahl's armor and properties on the battlefield, but because Muawwad had passed away, it said that the portion then went to Muawwad. So we'll come on to how the spoils of war, the ghanima, the booty, was distributed. Perhaps next time, inshallah. So that's the story of Abu Jahl. So there is one other evil leader of the Quraysh whose ending is also documented quite vividly. Excuse me. And this is, again, I mean, he is corrupt, you know, whereas Abu Jahl has some noble yet evil leadership qualities. He is a leader. Then you've got some other of the noblemen of the Quraysh who are evil against Prophet and against the Muslims, but in a more base level, and you know, of all the other Quraysh who persecuted the Muslims, the one who was the most well, not arrogant, but base in their persecution was Ummayah ibn Khalaf, right? Umayyah, we've talked about his story before. I mean, he's you know, an overgrown, overfed, fat coward. He didn't want to fight, you know, and it was only because Abu Jahal had taunted him that he came along to fight. He had no intention of fighting. He tried to buy his way out of the battle because he was told by the Prophet ﷺ that the Prophet ﷺ would see him executed or killed, you know, when they next meet or when they meet outside of Makkah. So he never wanted to leave Makkah because he knew that the word of the Prophet ﷺ was true. Ummayah bin Khalaf, he was the one that when Abu Jahl said, who, you know, the Prophet ﷺ, he's praying in front of the Kaaba, there's been a camel that's been slaughtered outside, who's going to go and get the entrails of that camel and dump it on the Prophet ﷺ whilst he's in sajda? It's Ummayah bin Khalaf, who was the one who, in his, you know, noble, fine clothing, went, picked up the disgusting entrails of the slaughtered animal and dumped them on the Prophet ﷺ as he was doing sajda, you know, and then Fatima had to come crying and take it off. He is the one, again, well known for persecuting Bilal. And again, just going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the battle, you've got the Muslims chanting Ahad, Ahad, Ahad. Again, that's the thing that Bilal would be chanting as he's being roasted on the hot pebbles and stones in the desert by Umayyah. Okay, and then he would have hot pebbles and rocks, you know, placed on Bilal, would have them placed on him, you know, in the desert. And you know, to this day, we know these stories of torture, and you know, they've become legend. Likewise, you know, the people of Medina knew these stories. This was legend for them. You know, the persecution of the early Muslims, including, you know, Bilal by people like Umayyah. And again, just as Allah found a disgraceful end for Abu Jahal, you know, through these two youngsters and the son of a shepherd, he disgraced Umayyah by a you know, very disgraceful end, where you can say, again, Allah's justice is infinite. You know, as he did, so was done unto him. So Umayyah, we talked about how he didn't want to come and fight, and you know, he's there on the battlefield with his son, and he sees everyone fleeing. He sees it's around. He knows that he can't get back. His camel's, you know, gone, and he's stranded on the battlefield. He then notices his best friend from the time of Jahiliyyah, which is Abdur-Rehman ibn Auf. So he calls out to Abdur-Rehman, who's killed some other Quraishi, and is carrying that armor from that back to base. And again, the assumed law was that you know, before definitive revelation came, that if you'd kill someone, you were probably likely to get their share, or certainly you'd get their armor. This was what was traditionally done on the battlefield at the time before Islam. So without any firm revelation around what happens on the battlefield, the Muslims are just going by assuming that may be what's going to happen. So Abdur-Rehman, he's walking back with this armor back to base, and then Umayyah sees him and calls him out. And he, again, Umayyah couldn't say Abdur-Rehman because Abdur-Rahman's name before he became a Muslim was Abdul Amrin. And then when he became a Muslim, Abdur-Rehman changed his name to Abdur-Rehman. But Umayyah, as his best friend, said, look, I don't recognize Allah as Ar-Rahman. You know, we say it all the time, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. But he says, we don't recognize this quality of Allah. We don't recognize him as Ar-Rahman. I refuse to call you Abdur-Rahman. You need to give me another name. And then Abdur-Rahman says, look, my name is Abdur-Rahman now, and you should call me as Abdur-Rahman, because I'm not going to call you that. So Umayyah says, I will call you Abdul-Illah. Will you accept that? And Abdur-Rahman says, yeah, fine. If you want to call me that, that's fine. It's not my name, but I will respond to that name. So Umayyah, he calls out, Abdul-Illah, protect me. Take me as your prisoner, and I will give you as much as you want. Right? So again, very transactional. Spare my life. Okay? You spare my life, take me as your prisoner, I will give you anything you ask for, because I'm a rich man, I'm one of the leaders of the Quraish. I'll give you all my wealth just to spare my life. So Abdur-Rehman, he's carrying this armor. He looks at the armor, he looks at Umayyah, he throws the armor down, and then he goes over to Umayyah and his son, and then he puts his arms around them, and you know they are now his prisoners of war. And they're walking back. He's walking back as their prisoners of war. And who should see Abdur-Rehman taking Umayyah and his son back to, you know, the Muslim base where the prisoners of war are likely to be kept? Who do you think sees them?
The Prophet.
Not the Prophet.
Abu Bakr.
Not Abu Bakr.
Then Umar.
No.
Hamza?
Bilal.
Oh.
Of course it has to be Bilal. So Bilal shouts out, you know, Ummayah bin Khalaf, the leader of the kuffar, you're giving him security. So he's there up to Abdur-Rehman saying, how can you give protection to Umayyah, the you know, one of the fiercest, most basest enemies of the Muslims, right? And then Abdur-Rehman says, look, you know, fair enough, but they are my prisoners. What can I do? You know, they are prisoners of war. I'm taking them as my prisoners, you know. So it's a grey area. They're still on the battlefield. He's not taken them back to the security of the Muslim camp as official prisoners. He's escorting them back, but they're still technically on the battlefield. So Bilal says, Ummayah bin Khalaf, the head of Kufr, I will not allow this. Essentially saying, over my dead body. I'm not going to allow this. So the thing that we know Bilal for, he had a strong, beautiful, powerful voice because he was the first mu'adhin. He was the one who would be shouting in the desert as he's being tortured on the pebbles, Ahad, Ahad, right? So he screams out, he goes over to a group of Ansar and says, do you see that person over there? That is Ummayah bin Khalaf. He is the head of Kuffar, right? He is the leader of the Kuffar. So he is winding up the Ansar and saying, look, you cannot let that person leave the battlefield alive, right? And like I said, the story of the torture of Bilal is legend. The Ansar know it. You know, Bilal is the muadhin, right? So Bilal is shouting out, the head of Kufr, the head of Kufr. So then a group of these Ansar, you know, they come up to Abdur-Rehman and says, you know, they start, you know, wanting to, they start trying to attack Umayyah and his son. Then Abdur-Rehman says, look, I couldn't keep hold of them both. And, you know, Umayyah's a big, overfed person. So he says he let his son go and run off to distract the people. And then he's telling Umayyah to come run with me to safety. So he's trying to take Umayyah back to safety. The son runs off. The others, they pounce on him, they kill the son, then they come back, and they try. And Abdur-Rehman's trying to protect his booty because, you know, again, he's a businessman. He knows he's going to get a lot of wealth for Umayyah, and as he's trying to protect Umayyah, you know, the Ansar are trying to kill Umayyah with their swords, and he's they're trying to dodge Abdur-Rehman as well. But obviously, you know, because it's all quite frantic, they accidentally, you know, cut Abdur-Rehman on his leg, and then, you know, he later on says, "May Allah have mercy on Bilal. I lost the armor, and I lost, you know, Ummayah ibn Khalaf and his son and the wealth that was, for that. And I've got this scar to prove for it. This scar is all I have to show for it. May Allah have mercy on Bilal." But obviously he understood why Bilal was saying that. And so in the end, you know, Umayyah was killed. Abdur-Rehman couldn't protect him, and then sort of he slumped like a whale probably on the ground on the hot pebbles. And it said that when it came time to bury them, everyone else was all the dead of the Quraysh. They were taken and they were cast into the well, and inshallah we'll do that next time. So they were cast into the well. When they tried to take Umayyah to the well, he's like a beached whale. Every time they pick him up, right, so the skin peels off, right? Again, this is the qadr of Allah. The skin peels off, and they're not able, because they're not able to actually lift him up and drag him and dump him in the well. So, and they're not going to try that hard. I mean, he's the head of Kufar. He's a Quraysh. Why would the Muslims, spend too much effort in giving him, the end like that? So, again, this is the justice of Allah. He's the only one who wasn't, dumped in the well. He was left to rot in the hot sun on the stones, but they couldn't find anything to cover him up, so they just covered him up with a lot of hot stones that were found on the battlefield. They just got some stones and dumped it on his body and just left him there. Okay, so again, you can see that divine justice there, that almost poetic justice, for people like Abu Jahal and Ummayyah, how they found their end. So we'll probably finish there. There's still a couple of other minor stories from the battlefield that we'll talk about next time, including Abu Hudayfa, who saw his father, his brother, and his uncle die in the Mubaraza. And we'll talk about Al-Jarrah and Abu Ubaidah Amr, who was being pursued by his own father to kill him on the battlefield. Right? So we'll talk about that next time, and inshallah then we'll talk about what happened at the end of the battle. So again, any questions, email in, Facebook, WhatsApp, and we'll try to cover them there. And again, like I suggested last time, do pick up the Qur'an, do open it up to Surah Al-Anfal, do read the surah, and especially in translation, to sort of get a gist of what happened in the battlefield. And the surah was revealed at the end and explains the Battle of Badr, which is such a momentous occasion. So inshallah we'll talk more about that next time. So until then, inshallah, we'll just finish with Surah Al-Asr. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Wal-Asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilus salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.